The rain hammered against the shuttle's windows, like bullets against armor, each drop exploding into 1,000 fragments that obscured the view of Maple Ridge's pristine sidewalks. Inside the small community transport vehicle, 11-year-old Nathan Rodriguez pressed his face against the cool glass, watching the storm transform his neighborhood into something from a disaster movie. His breath fogged the window as he traced patterns with his finger, his other hand resting protectively over the medical alert bracelet that had become his constant companion since the diagnosis 3 months ago. The shuttle lurched to a halt at the community center, its brakes squealing in protest against the wet pavement. Nathan's stomach dropped as he saw the familiar figure striding toward the vehicle, her HOA badge gleaming like a sheriff's star pinned to her rain-soaked blazer. Karen Winters moved with the purposeful stride of someone who had appointed herself the neighborhood's moral authority. Her sharp features set in the permanent scowl that had become her trademark at every community meeting. "Driver, stop this vehicle immediately!" Karen's voice cut through the storm as she yanked open the shuttle door, bringing with her a gust of wind that sent loose papers swirling around the interior. Water dripped from her perfectly styled hair, now plastered against her skull. But her eyes burned with the same fierce intensity that had made her the most feared member of the Maple Ridge Homeowners Association board. Nathan's heart began to race, the familiar flutter that his cardiologist had warned him about. The temporary arrhythmia condition made his chest tight whenever he experienced stress. And, right now, watching Karen's predatory gaze sweep across the shuttle's occupants, he felt like a rabbit caught in the headlights of an oncoming truck. The elderly driver, Miguel Santos, had been operating the community shuttle for nearly a decade. He knew every resident by name, every stop by heart, and every rule in the HOA handbook. But he also knew Karen Winters, and the way she could twist those rules into weapons when it suited her purposes. "Ma'am, we're just making our regular rounds. Everyone here has proper authorization to use the shuttle service." "Not everyone." Karen's voice dripped with disdain as her eyes locked onto Nathan. "Some people are taking advantage of services they don't deserve, using resources that should be reserved for those who truly need them." The other passengers shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Mrs. Chen, an elderly woman with a walking cane, clutched her purse tighter. The teenage girl with the broken ankle cast glanced nervously between Karen and Nathan, sensing the tension building like electricity in the air before a lightning strike. Nathan's mother had enrolled him in the shuttle service after his diagnosis. When Dr. Martinez had explained that his heart condition required him to avoid excessive physical exertion, the community shuttle was supposed to be a lifeline, a way for residents with mobility challenges to navigate their neighborhood safely. Nathan qualified under the medical necessity clause, but he had always felt self-conscious about using the service, especially when Karen's disapproving stare followed him during community events. "I have a medical pass," Nathan said quietly, his voice barely audible over the sound of rain against the roof. He fumbled for the laminated card in his backpack, the one with his doctor's signature and the official HOA stamp that had taken his mother weeks to obtain through the proper channels. Karen stepped fully into the shuttle, her presence filling the small space like smoke in a closed room. "Medical pass. You're taking up space that could be used by someone who actually needs it. Look at you. You're perfectly capable of walking home. This service is for people with real disabilities, not for lazy children who want to avoid a little exercise." The words hit Nathan like physical blows. He had endured months of whispered comments about his weight, snide remarks about his participation in gym class, and the subtle ostracism that came with being different in a community that prized conformity. But this was different. This was public humiliation, delivered with the authority of someone who believed she had the right to judge his worthiness. "Ma'am, the boy has proper documentation," Miguel interjected, his voice steady but firm. The medical advisory board approved his use of the shuttle. I can't remove him without proper cause. Karen's laugh was harsh and bitter. Proper cause, I'm giving you proper cause. As a member of the HOA board, I'm exercising my authority to ensure community resources aren't being abused. This child is perfectly healthy. Look at him. He's just using his weight as an excuse to avoid walking, like every other child in this neighborhood. Nathan felt tears stinging his eyes, but he fought them back. His mother had taught him to be strong, to stand up for himself. But facing Karen's venom in front of witnesses felt like being stripped naked in public. I have a heart condition, he said, his voice stronger now. My doctor said I shouldn't overexert myself. Heart condition. Karen's voice rose to a shriek that made the other passengers wince. The only condition you have is laziness. You're manipulating the system, taking advantage of services meant for people who genuinely need them. Your mother should be ashamed, raising a child who thinks he's entitled to special treatment. The attack on his mother ignited something fierce in Nathan's chest. Don't talk about my mom like that. She's working 2 jobs to take care of me and my sister. She's not manipulating anything. She's following the rules. Karen's eyes narrowed to slits. Rules. I'll show you rules. Driver, stop this shuttle immediately and let this boy off. He can walk home like every other able-bodied child in this community. The rain never killed anyone. And maybe a little exercise will do him some good. Miguel gripped the steering wheel tighter. Ma'am, I can't do that. The weather is dangerous, and the boy has medical authorization. If you have concerns about his eligibility, you need to file a formal complaint through proper channels. I am the proper channels. Karen's voice reached a crescendo that made the windows seem to vibrate. I'm a board member, and I'm giving you a direct order. Remove this child from the shuttle immediately, or I'll have you terminated by the end of the week. The threat hung in the air like a sword over Miguel's head. He had a family to support, a mortgage to pay, and Karen had the political connections to make good on her promise. But he also had a conscience, and the sight of Nathan's frightened face in his rearview mirror made his decision for him. I'm sorry, son, Miguel said quietly, his voice heavy with regret. I have to ask you to step off the shuttle. Nathan's world tilted on its axis. The adults he had trusted to protect him were abandoning him to Karen's cruelty. The medical pass in his hand felt as worthless as a lottery ticket for a drawing that had already ended. He looked around the shuttle at the other passengers, hoping for support, but they all avoided his gaze, their silence as damning as Karen's words. That's more like it, Karen said with satisfaction. Now get off the shuttle and learn that actions have consequences. Maybe next time you'll think twice before trying to take advantage of community services. Nathan stood on shaking legs, his backpack heavy on his shoulders. The storm outside seemed to mock his predicament, each lightning flash illuminating the long walk home that stretched before him. But as he approached the shuttle door, Karen wasn't finished with her cruelty. And don't think you can just call your mother to come pick you up, she said, her voice dripping with vindictive pleasure. Part of learning responsibility is facing the consequences of your choices. You wanted to play games with the system. Now you get to walk home in the rain, like every other child who doesn't have special privileges. The injustice of it all crashed over Nathan like a tidal wave. He hadn't asked for his heart condition. He hadn't chosen to be overweight or to need medical accommodations. He had simply tried to follow the rules, to use the services he was legally entitled to. And now he was being punished for existing. This isn't fair, he said, his voice breaking. I didn't do anything wrong. Karen's smile was cold as winter ice. Life isn't fair, sweetheart. The sooner you learn that, the better off you'll be. Now get off this shuttle before I have you removed by security. Nathan stepped toward the door, but his foot caught on the edge of the step. Whether it was his nervousness, the wet conditions, or simply bad luck, he stumbled forward, his hands reaching out to break his fall. Karen, instead of helping him regain his balance, actually pushed him the rest of the way, sending him tumbling down the shuttle steps and onto the wet pavement. "Oops," Karen said with mock concern. "Maybe if you spent less time eating and more time exercising, you'd have better coordination." Nathan picked himself up from the ground, his knees scraped and his dignity in tatters. The rain immediately soaked through his jacket, sending cold rivulets down his back. He looked back at the shuttle, hoping for some last-minute reprieve, but Karen was already climbing back aboard, her mission accomplished. "Drive on," she commanded Miguel, "and make sure this doesn't happen again. I'll be monitoring the shuttle usage more closely from now on." As the shuttle pulled away, Nathan stood alone in the storm, watching the taillights disappear around the corner like dying stars. The walk home would take him at least 40 minutes in good weather, and, in this downpour, it would be even longer. But what hurt more than the physical discomfort was the knowledge that he had been abandoned by the very people who were supposed to protect him. What Nathan didn't know was that across the street, partially hidden behind a cluster of oak trees, a Channel 7 news van was parked with its camera equipment, trained on the community center. Reporter Jessica Martinez had been assigned to do a fluff piece about Maple Ridge's community services, the kind of feel-good story that filled the dead air between hard news segments. But, as she and her cameraman, Derek, had set up their equipment, they had witnessed something far more compelling than community spirit. "Are you getting this?" Jessica whispered to Derek, who was already adjusting his lens to capture the scene unfolding at the shuttle stop. "Every word," Derek replied, his voice tight with anger. "That woman just threw a kid off the bus in the middle of a thunderstorm. This is bigger than a community interest story." Jessica's journalistic instincts were screaming. She had covered enough stories to recognize abuse of power when she saw it. And what she had just witnessed was a textbook case of an authority figure using their position to bully a vulnerable child. The fact that it was all caught on camera made it even more explosive. "Keep rolling," she told Derek, "and make sure you get clear shots of the woman's face. I want to know exactly who she is and what authority she thinks she has to treat a child like that." As Nathan began his lonely walk home, his small figure disappearing into the storm, Jessica was already planning her investigation. She would track down the child's identity, verify his medical condition, and expose the woman who had so callously abused her power. This wasn't just a story anymore. It was a mission. Nathan's journey home became a test of endurance that would have challenged a healthy adult, let alone a child with a heart condition. The rain came down in sheets, turning the sidewalks into rivers and the streets into lakes. His shoes squelched with every step, water seeping through the worn soles and soaking his socks. His backpack grew heavier with each passing minute, as the fabric absorbed the moisture, the straps digging into his shoulders like ropes. By the time he reached the halfway point of his journey, Nathan was struggling to breathe. The irregular rhythm of his heart was becoming more pronounced, each beat feeling like a hammer against his ribs. He stopped under a bus shelter, gasping for air, his hands shaking as he tried to wipe the rain from his face. The medical alert bracelet on his wrist seemed to mock him with its presence. It was supposed to be a safety net, a way to communicate his condition to emergency responders. But what good was it when the very people who should have been protecting him had thrown him to the wolves? Nathan pulled out his phone, his fingers numb from the cold as he scrolled through his contacts. His mother was still at work, and he knew she couldn't leave her shift without risking her job. His sister was in college, hours away. His father had been out of the picture for years, another casualty of a family system that seemed designed to fail people like them. For a moment, Nathan considered calling 911, but what would he tell them? That he was wet and tired, that his heart was racing. The thought of explaining his situation to strangers, of having to justify his existence all over again, felt more exhausting than continuing his walk home. As he stood there, shivering in the bus shelter, Nathan made a decision that would define the rest of his life. He would not let Karen Winters break him. He would not let her cruelty define his worth. He would make it home on his own terms. And then, he would tell his story to anyone who would listen. The final stretch of Nathan's journey took him through the heart of Maple Ridge, past the pristine lawns and perfect hedges that had made the community famous in regional magazines. The irony wasn't lost on him that he was being excluded from the very neighborhood that marketed itself as a haven for families. The same streets that had been featured in glossy brochures were now the setting for his humiliation. When Nathan finally reached his front door, he was soaked to the bone and shivering uncontrollably. His mother's car wasn't in the driveway. She wouldn't be home from her second job for another 2 hours. He fumbled with his keys, his hands so numb he could barely grip them, and let himself into the empty house. The warmth of the interior was overwhelming after his ordeal in the storm. Nathan peeled off his wet clothes and wrapped himself in a blanket, but the chill seemed to have settled deep in his bones. He sat on the couch, his phone in his hands, debating whether to call his mother and tell her what had happened. She had enough stress in her life without adding this to her burden. But as Nathan sat there, replaying the events of the afternoon, he realized that this wasn't just about him anymore. Karen Winters had revealed herself to be someone who abused her power to harm children. And, if she had done it to him, she would do it to others. The thought of another child going through what he had just experienced made his decision for him. Meanwhile, across town, Jessica Martinez was conducting the investigation of her career. She had identified Karen Winters as a member of the Maple Ridge HOA board, a woman with a history of controversial decisions and complaints from residents. The more Jessica dug, the more damning the picture became. Karen had been involved in several disputes over the years, using her position on the board to wage personal vendettas against neighbors she didn't like. She had filed complaints about children's toys being left in yards, forced families to remove playground equipment for safety violations, and had even tried to have a veterans memorial flag removed because it wasn't aesthetically pleasing. But the shuttle incident was different. It was caught on camera, involved a child, and represented a clear abuse of power that even Karen's supporters couldn't defend. Jessica knew she had a story that would resonate far beyond the borders of Maple Ridge. The investigation process revealed even more disturbing details. Jessica discovered that Nathan had been approved for shuttle services through the proper medical channels, with documentation from a pediatric cardiologist at the city's children's hospital. The condition was real. The need was legitimate, and Karen's actions had been completely unjustified. Jessica also learned that this wasn't Karen's first confrontation with Nathan. According to several witnesses, Karen had been targeting the boy for months, making snide comments about his weight and questioning his right to use community services. The shuttle incident was just the culmination of a sustained campaign of harassment. As Jessica prepared her story, she reached out to Nathan's family through official channels. She was careful to approach them with sensitivity, understanding that they were dealing with a traumatic situation. When she finally spoke with Nathan's mother, Maria Rodriguez, the woman's pain and anger were palpable. "My son is a good boy," Maria said, her voice breaking. "He follows the rules. He's polite to everyone. And he's been through so much with his health problems. For that woman to treat him like that, to humiliate him in front of everyone, it's unforgivable." Maria had been working 2 jobs to support her family ever since her husband left. She cleaned offices early in the morning and worked at a retail store in the evenings, leaving her little time to navigate the complex bureaucracy of the HOA. The shuttle service had been a godsend, allowing Nathan to get to and from school and community activities without putting strain on his heart. "I trusted the system," Maria continued. "I followed all the rules, got all the proper documentation, and I thought my son would be safe. I never imagined that someone would abuse their power to hurt a child." Jessica's story began to take shape, but she knew that the real impact would come from the video footage. Derek's camera had captured every moment of the incident, from Karen's initial boarding of the shuttle to Nathan's humiliating exit. The audio was clear enough to hear every cruel word, every callous justification for her behavior. The editing process was crucial. Jessica wanted to tell the story in a way that would generate outrage, without sensationalizing the suffering of a child. She focused on the facts, the clear abuse of power, and the broader implications for community governance. The story became about more than just one incident. It was about accountability, about protecting vulnerable people from those who would harm them. Jessica's news director, Michael Thompson, recognized the story's potential immediately. "This is front-page material," he said after viewing the footage. "But we need to be careful. We're dealing with a minor, and we don't want to make things worse for the family." The decision was made to air the story during the primetime news slot, with Nathan's identity protected and his family's privacy respected. The focus would be on Karen's behavior and the broader issues of accountability in community governance. As the broadcast date approached, Jessica felt the weight of responsibility on her shoulders. She had the power to bring justice to Nathan and his family, but she also had the potential to destroy Karen's life. The balance between accountability and proportionality was delicate, but the video footage spoke for itself. On the night of the broadcast, Jessica stood in front of the camera, her expression serious and professional. She had reported on murders, corruption scandals, and natural disasters, but she had never felt the gravity of a story quite like this one. "Good evening. I'm Jessica Martinez with Channel 7 News. Tonight, we bring you exclusive footage of a disturbing incident that occurred in the Maple Ridge community, where a homeowners association board member forced an 11-year-old boy with a documented heart condition off a community shuttle during a severe thunderstorm." The footage rolled, and viewers across the city watched in horror as Karen Winters displayed her cruelty for all to see. The audio was crystal clear, capturing every harsh word, every cruel justification. The moment when she pushed Nathan down the shuttle steps was particularly damning, showing a level of callousness that shocked even hardened news viewers. The story included interviews with medical experts who explained Nathan's condition, legal experts who discussed the potential criminal charges Karen could face, and community leaders who condemned her actions. The response was immediate and overwhelming. Within minutes of the broadcast, the Channel 7 phone lines were flooded with calls from outraged viewers. Social media exploded with condemnation, and the story began to trend nationally. The hashtag #JusticeForNathan became a rallying cry for people who had experienced similar abuse of power in their own communities. Karen Winters, who had been watching the news from her perfectly appointed living room, felt her world crumble around her. The footage was undeniable, her words indefensible. By the time the broadcast ended, her phone was ringing nonstop with calls from reporters, angry community members, and HOA officials demanding explanations. The next morning, Karen woke to find protesters gathered outside her house, holding signs demanding her resignation. The Maple Ridge HOA board, desperate to distance themselves from the scandal, called an emergency meeting. By noon, Karen had been stripped of her position and banned from all community activities. But the consequences didn't stop there. The city attorney's office announced they were investigating the incident for potential criminal charges, including child endangerment and assault. The state ethics board opened an inquiry into Karen's conduct, and several civil rights organizations offered to represent Nathan's family in potential lawsuits. The corporate sponsor of the community shuttle service, horrified by the association with the incident, immediately implemented new policies to protect riders from harassment. They also established a scholarship fund for Nathan's education, recognizing that he had become an unwitting symbol of resilience in the face of bullying. Nathan's story resonated with people across the country who had experienced similar abuse of power. Parents of children with disabilities saw their own struggles reflected in his experience. Victims of workplace harassment recognized the dynamics of power and intimidation that had played out on that rainy afternoon. The incident sparked broader conversations about accountability in community governance, the protection of vulnerable populations, and the responsibility of authority figures to use their power responsibly. Nathan had become more than a victim. He had become a catalyst for change. In the weeks that followed, Nathan's life began to change in ways he never could have imagined. The outpouring of support from strangers was overwhelming. Cards, letters, and donations arrived daily. A local businessman offered to pay for Nathan's medical expenses, and a group of parents organized a fundraiser to help his family with living expenses. More importantly, Nathan found his voice. He began speaking at community meetings, sharing his story with other children who had experienced bullying, and advocating for better protections for kids with disabilities. His mother, Maria, was amazed by her son's transformation from a shy, self-conscious boy into a confident advocate for justice. "He's found his purpose," Maria said in a follow-up interview with Jessica Martinez. "What happened to him was terrible, but he's turning it into something positive. He's helping other children who might go through the same thing." The Maple Ridge community, initially divided by the incident, ultimately came together in support of Nathan and his family. The new HOA board, elected in the wake of the scandal, implemented new policies to protect residents from harassment and ensure that community services were accessible to all who needed them. Karen Winters, meanwhile, faced the full consequences of her actions. She was charged with assault and child endangerment, charges that carried the possibility of jail time. Her professional reputation was destroyed, and she was forced to sell her house and move away from the community she had once lorded over with such cruelty. In a final twist of irony, Karen's former position on the HOA board was filled by Miguel Santos, the shuttle driver who had been forced to remove Nathan from the vehicle. Miguel's first act in his new role was to establish a Rider's Bill of Rights, ensuring that no child would ever again be subjected to the kind of harassment Nathan had endured. 6 months after the incident, Nathan stood before a packed auditorium at the city's annual Community Service Award ceremony. He had been selected to receive the Young Advocate of the Year award, recognition for his courage in speaking out against injustice and his work to protect other children from similar experiences. As Nathan accepted his award, he looked out at the audience and saw faces that reflected his own journey, people who had been knocked down by cruelty but had found the strength to stand up again. His acceptance speech was brief but powerful, capturing the essence of what he had learned from his ordeal. "Sometimes bad things happen to good people," Nathan said, his voice steady and clear. "But what matters is what we do next. We can let the bad things make us bitter, or we can use them to make the world a little bit better for the next person." The audience erupted in applause, but Nathan wasn't finished. "I want to thank everyone who supported me and my family during the hardest time of our lives. But mostly, I want to thank the person who hurt me, because she taught me that I'm stronger than I thought I was." As Nathan left the stage, He carried with him the knowledge that his story had made a difference. Children across the city were safer because of his courage to speak out. Community leaders were more accountable because of his willingness to stand up to power. And somewhere, a lonely woman named Karen Winters was serving her community service sentence, hopefully learning the difference between authority and cruelty. The rain had stopped falling long ago, but the ripples of that stormy afternoon continued to spread outward, touching lives and changing hearts in ways that would be felt for years to come. Nathan Rodriguez had walked home through a thunderstorm, but he had emerged from that walk as something more than he had been before: a voice for the voiceless, a protector of the vulnerable, and a reminder that sometimes the smallest among us can create the biggest changes. The story of that rainy afternoon would be told and retold, becoming a cautionary tale about the abuse of power and an inspiring example of how one child's courage can light the way for others. And, in the end, that was Nathan's greatest victory: not the awards or recognition, but the knowledge that his pain had been transformed into purpose, and his suffering had become a source of strength for others who would follow in his footsteps. The community shuttle still runs its daily routes through Maple Ridge, carrying children and elderly residents to their destinations with dignity and respect. The new policies ensure that every rider is treated with kindness, and the drivers are trained to recognize and prevent harassment. On the wall of the community center, a small plaque commemorates Nathan's courage, serving as a reminder that even in the darkest storms, there are always people willing to help light the way home. Nathan's heart condition continues to require monitoring, but his spirit has never been stronger. He has learned that true strength isn't about physical power or official authority. It's about standing up for what's right, even when it's difficult, even when you're standing alone in the rain, and in a world that sometimes seems designed to knock people down. That kind of strength is more valuable than any position or title could ever be. The storm that day had been temporary, but the changes it brought were permanent. Justice had been served, accountability had been established, and a community had learned to look out for its most vulnerable members. And somewhere in the distance, thunder still rolled across the sky, but now it sounded less like a threat and more like a promise that even the darkest clouds eventually pass, and that the sun always finds a way to shine through.